Rex knew something was wrong. His mother was laying in a strange box on the table. All the monsters were present in the room. They were crying, although it seemed like they were trying to hide it from him. They were all turned their heads when they looked at them, and it made him even more insecure. He walked up to his uncle and took a hold of one of his hands. Uncle Randall had tears in his eyes too, but he didn't want to turn his face away from his little nephew. The much longer the eye contact made Rex feel a little better, but he was still terribly sorry for his uncle being this sad. "Don't cry." He used two of his hands to pat Randall's hip, which made this highest point of his uncle's body he could reach. "I'll take care of you." Randall picked up the little one from the floor and hugged him and asked if he wanted to give Mom a flower, and Rex nodded quietly. So they walked over to the strange box. Sophie looked peaceful, as if she was only sleeping. The castic was in a shade deep of mahogany brown, with a cream-colored silk on the side, and flowers covered up the space around it. "Happy birthday!" Randall tried to strange a little laugh with a sob at the same time, as Randall handed Rex a single white rose, which the orange one placed it gently on his mom's chest. Since Sophie was being present with so many flowers, Rex believed it was their birthday. It was tragic, but wonderful comedic relief at the same time. Something that was always welcome, pointless funeral like this. Sully, also with watery eyes, walked up to the duo and placed his arm around Randall, which caused both the lizard to freeze. He didn't want Sullivan to show his affection for him in the public yet, but as soon as he made a minute or two gaze around him, he saw that the other monsters were holding each other too. He realized that the common thing to do at the funeral, and eventually leaned in and gave him against the soft blue monster's gesture, actually made him feel better. Randall wasn't able to recall a single second of the ceremony. The whole experience had been floating in a blur. All he could remember was how Sullivan had his hand around the whole way for it, and now how calm Rex miraculously had managed to be. The little monster had been sitting perfectly next to Sullivan for the whole time, and it hadn't made a sound, however. That could have been something to have to do with the fact that Sully had been feeding him with chocolates to make the ceremony bearable for him. Rex had remained calm until it was time to lower the castic down to the ground, and when that moment came, he started screaming, kicking, and crying. He showed no signs of stopping. There was no other way he was going to throw his mom down in a deep hole in the ground like that. His reaction caused other participants at the funeral to cry even more. So eventually Sully left Randall with Mike and Fungus in order to escort Rex back to the church so that he wouldn't have to watch the lowering. On the way there, they walked by Mike's car, and that cheered up Rex again. They studied it for quite a while, and Sully found himself being jealous of the little one's ability to forget the bad thoughts in a flash like that. For his own sake, he would probably have to live with the middle of the memories of his days forever. After the funeral, a little get-together was arranged for the meeting for the rooms at work. Sandwiches and cake were served. They all cried, talked, and cheered to Sophie's memory. It was horrible and very sad, but nice at the same time, and even Randall smiled when even one of the workers from the mailroom had told the crowd a funny story featuring Sophie from the last year's Christmas party. Later that afternoon, and when everything was over, Sully went home with Randall and Rex. Rex, rather exhausted, fell asleep almost straight away. He didn't even make it to his bed, but he went down on the couch while Randall was in the kitchen, preparing some porridge for him to eat. The lizard ended up giving the food to Sully, who denied it to begin with, but actually ended up finishing the bowl while Randall carried Rex to the guest bedroom and tucked him in with loving care. "Get some rest, kid." He stroked the single orange fawn, and after giving it some thought, he kissed his nephew on the cheek. "You're so brave, Rex." The orange monster curled himself up underneath the warm sheets and sucked his thumb in his mouth. Randall watched him for quite a while, before he slowly turned around and headed back to the living room. "I love you, Uncle Wandel." The sleepy mumble was barely audible, but barely loud enough to hear, but succeeded in reaching Randall's ears before he left the room. The purple lizard froze for a second, and then he whispered in his return. His voice was just as low as the other monsters. "I love you too, Rex. Sleep tight." Sully and Randall sat side by side on the couch, barely and hardly talking at all. Sully was eating what's left of Randall's takeout food, and after he had finished his own a little while ago. He hadn't known why he felt hungry, he just did. It had been a long day, which he had spoken quite a lot of energy. but still nothing seemed to fill him up now. Randall was the opposite. Apparently his appetite had been buried with Sophie's earlier this afternoon, and he had hardly been able to eat all day. He had managed to force down some noodles with Sullivan. He probably wouldn't have made it if the blue monster hadn't been there to make him eat. He just stared at the blank TV screen while listening to the sounds of Sullivan finishing his meal. His gaze moved over the painting of the wall, before eventually dropping down to the floor. "Can you stay the night?" The question that caught Sully off guard. He hadn't spent the night with Randall since their attempt to lovemaking around at least a week ago, and to be honest, he had been doubting that the other monster would ever want him to be in his bed again. After an experience like that, he could feel himself blushing just by thinking about it. "Sullivan," Randall asked again, "can you stay with me for the night?" "Sure, the blue monster felt out in the noodles as they grew in his mouth. "If you want me to, I'll stay. I just need someone to sleep next to." "I'll stay then. Thanks." Sully nearly placed the empty takeout food box on the table, in his free hand so he could take a hold of Randall's instead. He was worried about him. The lizard didn't look too good. "You okay?" "No." The answer was brutally honest and sent shivers down Sully's spine. "But it'll get better. Give it some time, Sullivan. Then I'll give you all the time you need, as if there's anything I can do to help you. Don't be afraid to ask, okay?" Randall nodded and let out a sigh, and he closed his eyes and opened them again, and then took a deep breath. I think I'm calling it early tonight, Sullivan." He got up from the couch and stretched his back and glanced at the monster who was still sitting. "Are you coming?" "Sure." Sully got up and walked with Randall into the living room and into the guest room to check on Rex, who was sleeping heavily. They watched him wordlessly for a moment, and then when Randall reassured that his nephew was still breathing, he left the room with Sullivan and started walking towards his own bedroom. None of them bothered brushing their teeth. Sully didn't even have his toothbrush, and Randall didn't even think about doing that. And they simply walked into Randall's room and collapsed onto the bed, completely exhausted. Randall mumbled a good night, which was so low that he could barely hear it himself. He lay down on his ordinary side of the bed, and Sully's answer wasn't much louder. "Good night, Randall." The blue monster pulled the covers over them both, and Randall cuddled up between them. His back was facing Sullivan. He closed his eyes and let out a heavy breath. Sully shut his eyes too, and felt that how tired he was. He rested his head on the soft pillow, and remembered the sense from the last time he had been sleeping there. He curled up his toes, which made him comfortable and ready to sleep, when Randall's voice was a bit louder this time, suddenly reached his ears. "Hold me." Sullivan opened his eyes again and gazed at the lizard, who had his back still turned to him, and placed him carefully around the slender finger, allowing the touch to his neck. "Thanks," Randall whispered, without opening his eyes. "No problem." The streets in the city was quiet. The clock had just turned 4. Rain had started falling again, and the wind threw it against the windows of all the buildings, making a sound of drumming. Sully opened his eyes and noticed that he just woke up. He yawned and just tried to concentrate his mind in order to find out what could have been. The repetitive sound of the rain was there, but that wasn't the drumming sound of the rain that he had been disturbed, heavy sleeper before. Then he heard the sound again, and realized it came from Randall, the purple monster who was crying quietly, laying out hushed sobs every now and then. "Hey," the furry monster stroked the other one's arm with care. "You okay? Did I wake you?" Randall didn't turn around. "Well, yeah, sort of," Sully admitted with a tired grin, but there was no use in denying it. "I'm sorry. You don't have to apologize. Are you feeling okay?" "What time is it?" "No idea." Randall finally rolled his body over to the other side in order to let Sullivan face him. He looked terrible. His eyes were red and sore, and there were bags underneath them that revealed that he had been awake for a while. "I couldn't sleep. There's just too much going on in my mind." Sullivan then moved a little closer and took one hold of Randall's scaly hands. "You want to talk about it?" "No," Randall sighed. "I mean, not right now. We should probably get some sleep. I don't want to keep you up all night. Maybe we'll have plenty of time to talk later?" "Fine. Whenever you feel like it. Sleep tight, Ben." "You too." They both closed their eyes, and however, it didn't take much time for Randall to start whispering again. "What did I tell you, Sullivan? Huh?" "Caring for someone is a huge risk," he mumbled between quiet sobs. "It only leads to moments like this. If I hadn't reunited with Sophie, I wouldn't be feeling this way right now." "There are certain things that we can't predict, Randall," the blue one whispered with his eyes still shut, half asleep. "Luckily, if there was a lay ahead of us, we would have probably not worried so much. But honestly, I think it's better that we just take one day at a time and allow the surprises to come as they please. Don't you agree? He opened his eyes and glanced over at the other monster, who had wet cheeks, and continued talking. He ran a finger along Randall's jaw to wipe away some tears. And remember, all the surprises in life aren't bad, Randall. He smiled. He just look at what happened to us. Did you see this coming? Never. Sully's thoughts wandered back to the day that they had been onboarded with the sofa cushions by a starved, traumatized, and very angry lizard. Me neither. When I first found out you were back, I got your experience of your behavior, and I was frightened. I never thought this could be possible outcome. Randall chuckled, surprised by Sully with a smile. Really? You didn't see me as your future boyfriend? He shut his mouth and Sully opened his. What did you say? Nothing. They just stared at each other. Randall, Sully asked in a near whisper, do you see me as your boyfriend? Randall grinned out of discomfort. Well, we've kissed a lot and damn, he swallowed, wanted to cry again. I really don't know when you should move on from just friends into a relationship, but I thought, Randall. Sully placed one of his hands beneath the other's chin and lifted it so they could face each other again. I would love to be your boyfriend. You would? Randall's jaw dropped, and for a moment he was afraid that he'd throw up or faint again. I definitely would. Sully placed and pulled his shy smile, just feeling relieved that it had been years since their last relationship ended, and he had actually been wondering about the same stuff as Randall. At that point, it was normal to say the original relationship of, instead of just dating, a step away to make things a huge step. That's, of course, if you want to be. Damn it, Sullivan, Randall hissed. If this is gonna work, you'll have to stop treating me like a nervous wreck who doesn't know his own good. Well, then you'll have to cheer up now and then. And you'll have to, Randall thought, but for a little while. Forget it. Just to promise me you will always remain the annoying, shedding, goofy idiot who is you, okay? Only if you continue to be you. You could just told me to cheer me up. You could just still be you. Just try to smile more often, Randall. It suits you. Randall tried his best, but he couldn't keep his lips from curling upwards and the pathetic attempt to hide it. He leaned in closer and kissed his boyfriend's soft lips, and his heart started pounding when Sullivan kissed him back. It was a gentle, mild begin to whiff, and it developed as they got more eager. Their hands wandered, their heartbeats went up, and by this time there was no fumbling around, no embarrassment, no insecurity. The only things that were present were now determination, pleasure, passion, and even love.